Good evening from Vietnam. Good morning to the three of you. Good evening to Vivian from Thailand also. So thanks a lot for spending your day, your evening time with us tonight and talk about the topic that we're fascinated about. It's about thinking and how we can help people to grow the ability to think. You guys are wonderful thinkers and help people to improve in that space. So that's why we want to have you to join and share your thought on this. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Hey, when I was young, right, my mom always, when she thinks, she sat in a very quiet corner and she really hate me to disturb her during that period. Like when I asked her, she tell me to go away. I'm thinking, right? So and when I was young, I was always fascinated about what is that in her head that she'd say one in the morning she says she loved me, and then in the afternoon she told me to go away for her to think, and that thing kept on with me for a very long time. So tonight we're gonna find the answer for that, and I would love to go with the very basic question: is what is thinking to you? And I would like to start it that with Karen first. Is that okay?
Yes. And what I like about what you're saying is the element of quiet. I think about the definition of thinking as an intentional pause that creates space for synthesis to occur. And here's what I mean by that. We're all taking in lots of data, little data points, and it only turns into a thought that becomes an idea that could become an action when we create space for all of those inputs to come together into something more meaningful, a spark of some sort.
Wow. How about you, Tammy?
I'm glad you didn't come to me first, because as I'll talk about a lot today, I need time to process. So for me, thinking can be slow, it can be fast, it can be inward, it can be outward, it can be intentional, or it can be spontaneous. But it's a process that we go through to let others know a point of view on something. I'll start with that.
Wow. Liane, you're next.
It's complicated.
It is complicated. So let me build then, instead of, I completely agree, but let me build to what I think. So thinking is happening whether we wanted to or not. That's, judgment, the way we judge people is thinking that we have very little control over. Anxiety and the way we process emotions into feelings, we're thinking about those things. But what I think is really interesting and missing is thinking about thinking. So what the scientists call metacognition. And so that to me is another piece. So we're thinking all the time. Are we doing what Karen is advising, which is going from just the noise in our head that's happening all the time to more of what Tammy's talking about, distilling into a point of view, into a perspective where we're thinking about how we're thinking. Because only when we do that can we start to challenge the ways that we're thinking that aren't serving us or aren't serving the community. Or so I think there's thinking, and then there's that thinking about thinking that gets really deep. And I just have to say, before Vivian jumps in, I'm like, that is the coolest Microsoft Teams background I've ever seen, with the thunder and lightning going on in the background. Bangkok's got some crazy weather tonight.
So Karen, go to you again, because you talk about the thinking is process of getting data in, right? And so what else involved into that thinking process, Karen, besides the information that we're absorbing?
Yes, it's not just the data that we read in an email or hear on a podcast or take away from a conversation like this. We are getting other ideas, as Liane mentioned, from what we're observing in the world around us. It could be a point of view from someone else. It could be a package of something that you see at the store. All of these become inputs into how we think about what's possible. And what I think about are the people who are phenomenal innovators take data points and inspiration from so many different places, and they synthesize that in a new and different way to create something that was not before, simply by taking little inputs from everywhere and assembling them in an unlikely way. Now, we've all had the experience of a spontaneous inspiration or idea. You're out taking a walk or you're using a product and you think, wouldn't it be wonderful if there were a miniature version, for example, of a tripod and a ring light that were all attached together that were about $99 I could take with me when I travel? Is that out there? I don't know. But I'm hacking a scenario I'm in right now based on the input of things I know to be true. The challenge of doing a video conference on the road, the challenge of having a great background, the challenge of great lighting. I'm attaching it to something I know, real products and real experiences I've had, and now I'm imagining what's possible. This is the basis of innovative thinking, right? Taking these inputs and assembling them in an unlikely or an unusual way that hasn't been done or tried before.
With that being said, I would like to continue with you because input are so many out there, Karen. So in the world, so many noise. We've been in between the noise, good information, and not really good information, even until the bad information and all, right? So where can we filter the noise to get into our thought, our brain, only the information that important enough to help us to think, though?
Every experience is useful. I think about it as nothing is wasted. The key is how you feel about those data points that you're taking in. Liane was starting to reference this earlier. Essentially, can you be an observer of those inputs without emotionally attaching to them? For example, right now in the headlines, we're all seeing news of organizations that are cutting workers. Now, if I attach an emotion to that thought, I'll start to feel for these people who are losing their jobs. I'll start to worry, about how this might spread out and affect all of us in our day-to-day lives or in our organizations. If I step back and observe that thought, what could I create? Maybe it's a career placement service that helps people who are instantly losing their jobs. When we attach an emotion to that data point, when we get attached to it with a feeling, that's what clouds our ability to make that input useful, because to use Liane's word, we've put a judgment on it. It's good or bad. It's right or wrong. It works with what I believe to be true or works against it. That's the enemy of thinking. That's the enemy of creation. I believe every experience, every input is useful so long as we don't emotionally attach to all of them.
Beautiful. Liane, how about you?
So I think that, that's the really, I love Karen's point about connection. So Tammy and I, a long time ago, set to work figuring out how do we make people more strategic, which is another important word alongside of Karen's word about innovative. And we started saying it's exactly what Karen's talking about. So we said, more time to reflect, to actually think about what input am I taking in, to think about whether there is emotional attachment to that and how can I remove that. So reflecting, then making those connections. So what I'm going to add is what's often missing from thinking. And as you know, I do a campaign on LinkedIn every year in November called No-vember, which is to say no to things to make us more effective. So the last step in being strategic is actually figuring out how to say no to some things. And where we lose in our thinking is when we think more is better. When we think I don't want to miss out on something. When we think I can't say no to that idea. What if I missed an opportunity? What if that's the next great thing? And so we become beholden to all of these ideas. And ultimately, none is successful because we didn't make choices. So this conversation is so exciting because it's building so beautifully. So if we take what we started with about reflecting, we add to it Karen's point about, connecting, and then I'm going to add the no to it, which is that we don't become so sucked in that we try and be everything, diluting ourselves, but instead start to say no and make choices. So that's something that I see really missing these days. We're trying to do too much. We're not making enough good choices.
Wow. And the November now become a really, really big trend in Vietnam, because every day we talk about it on the coffee shop, we share with our community and say, how can we make that November happen so that we can declutter our works then and have time to do something more meaningful. And
yes.
and then this part of the world, Liane, people need to understand how to say no more often than another part of the world. I don't know, but this part of the world, it's saying yes seems to be, automatically come out most of the time, especially from, when your boss, your manager, your leader says something.
Yes.
And that part creates a lot of works unnecessarily for them. And they need to learn how to say no also. Right?
Yeah, it's very difficult. So we have cultural differences, but we also have power differences in North American organizations where it becomes hard to say no. People who feel they have less power, marginalized groups who don't feel they can say no. So learning how to say no by framing it in terms of things that matter to the organization, calling on things the boss has said about priorities, finding ways for those of us who feel disempowered to say no for the benefit of the organization, of our productivity. But I agree with you. It's something that for many reasons and in many parts of the world is very difficult.
Thanks. So we have Tammy is not yet answering this question. So can you share with us your thought on this?
Kind of been percolating in my brain throughout this is going back to the story you told about your mom and how you started us today, how she needed that time to kind of sit back and think. And maybe as a young child, you were upset or offended by that. But what it has me thinking is we need to do a much better job of letting others know how we best think and how we can best contribute. And again, Liane and I worked together for so long, and she knows that I need processing time. So if you say, Tammy, I need that strategy in 2 days, present it to me. I've got 2 days to go and squirrel away, and I'll come back with something fantastic to get feedback on. I can hide away and I can write a fantastic book. But if in a meeting you present something brand new to me and you say, what do you think? I literally freeze. And it's interesting because this is what, in the work I do in the advancement of women, this is what I hear all the time from a lot of people, but mostly women. And so now we're kind of getting a little bit into the psychology of it, but how we can paralyze our thinking with the stress of the moment, with imposter syndrome, with thinking we have to know everything about it to be able to contribute, all of the things that we do to kind of stress ourselves out so that we can't use the proper functioning of our brain. So that's kind of what's been going on in my mind through this conversation is how can we get better at letting others know? Even today would have been a great example. I reached out and said, hey, just tell me a little bit, what is this conversation about? What do you want us to comment on? Are there, 5 questions you're going to be asking? And then I thought, you know what? I'm going to use this as a bit of an experiment for myself and see how I go.
Very interesting one. Tammy, we have the thing saying is thinking is hard, so that's why we judge, right? Many people judge. So in order for us to like you to let Liane know how best for you to think, then it's first come from how you know what is best for you in thinking, right? So I want to start with you. How can you know what is the best environment, the best way for Tammy Heermann to think, so that you can share with your boss?
So the first clues are when you have nothing to say in the moment, and then it all comes back to you, later. Sometimes when it's too late, and people already think, they make their assumptions about your capability. But a lot of it, and I think the others, and I know Liane's done some good research in this area, is oftentimes when we aren't thinking about things. Actually, Karen, you mentioned that as well. So my best thoughts, God is my witness, are in the bathroom, in the shower. I remember making a really critical aha moment, and I quickly typed. It was a former boss who was creating a model for a book, and I cracked it in the shower, and I wasn't even thinking about the book. I wasn't thinking about anything but washing my hair, and it came to me. And so for me, I need a lot of that free time, dissociative, doing other things, and I need to noodle on it for a long time. So I need to kind of process things. Now, you don't always have that luxury in business. And so for me, and what I often advise others to do is just create, like today, I've got this little thing in front of me. As soon as, Karen says something, or Tran says something, or Liane, I literally put down a word or a phrase so that I can come back to it, because my brain is all over the place. So distilling for me is a hard thing to do, because I'm like, so I need to be able to kind of take these things and think about it and distill it. And then the product will be very good, but it's messy in the process.
Wow. Liane, I want to continue with you for that question, would you?
Yeah, so ask it again. Sorry, huh?
So the question is, it's hard for people to think, right? So
Yeah.
So that's why a lot of us judge. So now, if we want our people, our boss, our colleagues know how to create the best environment for us to think, then we need to know how best it is for us to think first, right? So in your experience, how can we, you figure out what is best for you to think now?
Yeah. So one of the things, because my background is psychology, I often think about individual differences in how we come at things. So there are some major categories. So there are people who think best when they are physically moving. People who like to garden, and it's when they're, puttering in the garden that the great idea comes to them. So you may be somebody who needs to shake it off, move to have the idea come. Other people are very socially motivated. That's me. So, I'm one to grab another person, talk it out, let the ideas build, that sort of thing. Other people are more about process and order and structure. And so for them, they need to say, okay, wait, I need to put this plan in order. Let's map out how we're going to talk about this. So it's understanding that individuals differ in what environment and what behaviors support their best thinking. And we want to, so when I work with a team of people, I use an assessment tool to help people understand their own best modes of thinking, but then to create a safe place for them to share that with their teammates. So for example, Tammy could say, if you want the best of me, prime that discussion a couple of days ahead of time, and wait till you see the awesome stuff. Whereas someone else could say, you know what, I'm stuck. Can we just go for a walk and keep talking about this while we walk? So that's a great way of understanding your own personal thinking modes, and then being able to communicate that with the people you work with.
Beautiful, beautiful. And Karen, I want to hear that from you also.
Create a pattern interrupt.
Create
a pattern interrupt. And here's what I mean by that. If you always do all of your work at a certain desk, looking at the same setting, using your same devices and your same tools, you're unlikely to get breakthrough idea without creating a pattern interrupt that says, I'll take my laptop, or maybe I switch, like Tammy was saying, to a pen and paper, and now I go sit outside. Right? I sit outside in my backyard, or I move to the break room of our office. Create a pattern interrupt. When I think about creating a pattern interrupt, that can also be asking someone else that I might not likely collaborate with what they see in the situation, right? If each time I get stuck, I always go to my manager, the pattern interrupt is to go to a colleague. We rarely get to a new idea. We rarely come up with a strategic plan. We rarely feel comfortable, right, that we can take everything we've written on our piece of paper and turn it into something, following those deeply grooved ridges in our brains of ingrained habits.
Wow.
The second thing I would offer is, Tammy, when you were talking, you reminded me of a book I just finished reading from a brilliant thought leader. Her name is Jeanette Bronet, and the book is called The Self-Care Mindset.
We love Jeanette.
Right? And Tammy, maybe you were speaking to this, and I love her as well. I love her framework that you could use either as a leader or as an employee, or even in this conversation. And you started going in this direction. What I need so that, or from a manager or leader perspective, what do you need so that? So in this example, I might say, Tammy, what do you need so that you can show up at your best during the podcast or presentation today, right? Or I might say, I need coffee so that my brain is functioning to have a rational thought during our conversation today. What that framework does is it gives us a language to do exactly what you said, Tammy, and what you were talking about, Liane, which is to normalize inside of the moment the opportunity to create a pattern interrupt that says, it's not, you ask me a question, I give you an answer, you give me an assignment, I have a big thought. It's the pattern interrupt says what I need so that I can be at my best and show up with the answer, the outcome, the presentation, the new idea, the book that you need is, and then let someone know. In fact, I just read a study recently and was interviewing the CEO of MBO Partners, right? A big company where people contract, right? It's a big organization of contractors. And their research indicates people would rather quit their job than ask their manager for the help they need to be successful in that job. And what I love about Jeanette Bronet's framework is it gives us a language that just normalizes, if you want me to be awesome, I'm going to let you know exactly how to do that.
Wow. With that being said, it's so exciting. I wanna bring it to the next level. All right. So I want to start with Karen also. Now earlier, Tammy said that in business, well, we don't have a luxury of times, right? A lot of time we have to put a group of people onto the room together and let them think together. So I cannot group Tammy, fulfill Tammy's desire of thinking, because it's best for you to write or it's best for you in the shower, right? But in the office, we don't have that luxury, all right? And we cannot walk out in the wood and so we have the fresh air of thinking. So in that setting of restraint, so and we bring the model that Jeanette Brené that Karen brought up also. So
Jeanette Bronet,
right? What I need so that, right? So what do leaders need to do so that they can create the environment within that quick, that frame to make people can think best, regardless of their styles of thinking, though.
Commit to gathering with a purpose and communicate that purpose with clarity in advance. So let's take, we have Liane and Tammy here with perhaps slightly different styles that they're articulating about how they think. As a leader that wants to get the most out of a meeting, I would commit to gathering that today we are going to come up with ideas to solve our 10% budget cut that's facing us. And I would communicate in advance that this is the topic. I would communicate where the meeting is going to happen, when the meeting is going to happen, and the expected role of each person in that meeting. We're going to come up with as many ideas as we can, and we aren't going to judge whether they're good or bad. Now, this gives Tammy time to start her list. She's going to wash her hair a lot to come up with ideas. But when she comes in, she's going to have something to contribute. Liane might say, I'm very good in the moment. I play off of other people. When their energy starts going, I start going too. And then after that session concludes, continue the session in some kind of collaborative document where people can keep adding their I'm out jogging epiphany ideas to that document. So now what you've done is you've accommodated the styles and made the best of the pre-meeting, the in the meeting, and the post-meeting, because somebody needs time to prepare. Somebody needs the energy and enthusiasm of the moment. And somebody after the fact is going to go, I wish I thought of that when we were there. That's the idea that would get me promoted. Now we've made space for all of those styles. It rests on the meeting organizer to have a clear purpose, communicate a clear purpose, give people the opportunity to show up at their best with those tools. We'll borrow from another great thought leader, Brene Brown, right? She says, unclear is unkind. People tend not to show up at their best to do a thinking activity when they feel they are ambushed. They don't know we're coming into a brainstorming meeting, an idea meeting, a creative collaboration. And when they get there, it's either freeze or we have the oversharing crowd. We know who these people are, don't we? Right? They feed off of a hyper energy that they tend to overshare. The ideas aren't great ones, but they must dominate the room.
Wow.
So think about commit to gathering with a purpose, communicate with clarity what that purpose is, and think about pre-meeting, during meeting, post-meeting. Those are all a continuum of that thinking motion.
Wow. What if we had no time to plan, Karen? So like emergency that happened, an earthquake.
Then you better be running. I was going to say, then you better be running the country or the Air Force, or maybe working on a call center support line. A reset, the pattern interrupt that we can create in that moment that we were talking about earlier is take a breath. The pattern interrupt is a pause, even for 5 to 10 seconds. To breathe in for 4 counts, hold it for 4 counts, release for 4 counts, or 7 if you like the extended breath. That will take you 10 seconds maximum. And what that will allow you to do is calm down your parasympathetic nervous system and get out of that fight, flight, or freeze mode and show up in the moment. And then say, what I need so that I can give you this emergency information is 5 minutes with my pen and paper and a quiet moment to write it down. So I'll give you an answer in 5 minutes. Or the best I can come up with right now is this. With another 30 seconds or a minute, I could have more. So the pattern interrupt in that moment is taking a breath, breathing, calming yourself down, and then arriving in that moment.
Beautiful, beautiful. Liane, can you add on top of that?
Yeah, it's hard to add because, I am in 100% alignment with Karen. When I work with teams, I'm really emphasizing we're putting too much pressure on meetings. We need to do more in advance of meetings and leave room to what I call, like from gymnastics, stick the landing by having that place where we commit, which should not be in the meeting where we're kind of all in a frenzy of ideas. So maybe what I'll add is today's November is about no to horrible, bulky pre-read documents. Because that's been our answer to before the meeting. Somebody will either send out a 273-page of everything they've ever thought about the project, or they'll send out the PowerPoint presentation that they plan to present that has no details. And people will either read or not read, and then the presenter will have to just repeat everything. So we're really in an ineffective state with pre-reads. So I'm going to just sort of build on, in complete agreement with Karen, on the idea of primers. So a primer to me is a document that is specifically for the purpose of priming the conversation. It is not the same thing as what you will present and use to workshop the conversation. It's got both subjective context information, but also objective evidence and data and what we know so far. But most importantly, it includes, here are some of the options we would like you to weigh in on. Here is a decision that needs to be made. So it frames it. A great primer document is, maybe 5-6 pages, but it has everything you need to set up the conversation effectively. It tends to get those oversharers constrained a little bit. It brings in the folks who are more pensive and thoughtful. So I'm just completely agreeing, but I'm just one notch more specificity on, it's really important we get out of our horrible habits around pre-reads and start priming our conversations more effectively.
Beautiful. And I'll get back to that habit after Tammy answer this question, okay? So Tammy, can you continue, please?
Yeah. So I have a couple things to add to this great conversation already. Is one would be in the moment. And when I coach and mentor, and again, especially women, minorities, and introverts,
Like 90% of the world.
I know. So we let them just stay quiet, and we can't do that anymore. So, for example, Vivian was in our team. If this was a team meeting, as the leader, and even as the team member, that's the problem. We have to say, Vivian, I haven't heard from you yet. So, and don't just put her on the spot. Say, you know what, in a couple minutes when I'm done, I'm coming to you, so that I'm giving her a second to frame her thoughts. We have to get better at that. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is, there are activities, there are methods that we can be using in our meetings to get those thoughts that aren't coming to the table. And usually it comes when you hire a facilitator, and that's why we make our money. But guess what? You can do these too. But for some reason, we have thought that, the professional way to run a meeting is to go into a boardroom with, crappy coffee or on a Zoom meeting and just you talk. Oh, you're not talking because you never talk. So, and that's a professional meeting. Rather than saying there's actual techniques. There is put your idea down, pass it to the right, build. In 5 minutes, we have no more ownership of ideas, so we're not just going to agree what the boss says or what the person always talking says. Like, there's techniques that facilitators use, and we can use those in our meetings. So you can tell I'm passionate about the in the meeting. Once we've planned it and we have good pre-reads, we need to handle the in the meeting dynamic.
What a great reminder also for me to ask Vivian, what is that you think about, what we can do to help people to think together.
Yes. Yeah. It's good that I got some signal back. So back into the meeting room. I feel like women in this part of the world not able to share their thinking a lot. One of the, I think, stereotype that women tend to be a bit more overthinking. So earlier, Karen was saying that some of the input, we don't need to put the emotion attached to it. So it's become a good input for processing the thinking. So my question is, how can we help the women to not attach too much emotion into the information so the thinking ability can be more effective to the action? So I think it's going to help us here to improve, and then more speaking up during the meeting.
Would you like to pick first?
Were you asking, Vivian?
We were asking you.
Who first? Who do you want first?
Maybe Karen, since you were saying about detaching the emotion with the input, so maybe you can share a bit more the practice, how we can make that happen.
Thank you for raising this critically important topic and speaking into the conversation. One of the biggest barriers to belonging and to well-being and to high performance in every organization. And it's, how we feel about our ability to contribute and show up authentically as who we are and candidly get credit for our ideas as well. And the first thing that I would offer is collaborative documents are wonderful because as they get edited and refined, people add ideas over time. Your name, your title, your position in the organization, your gender, your ethnicity, many of your preferences are not visible. We just see what's forming. And that can be a beautiful way to hear from people who feel like they don't get heard often enough. So one technique I would say is, as often as possible, try to use, some kind of collaboration where what we see is not primarily your name, your title. We would have to really search in a collaborative document to get the history of who put everything in. And let's be honest, people aren't going to do that. So that's the first technique, is it's a great channel to show up. The second is, I've been there too. I was a young female leader in high tech, and I did every possible thing I could to try to blend in, dress like the people around you, talk like the people around you, act like the people around you, until one day I could no longer distinguish myself from anyone else. By the way, I wasn't fooling everyone. They all still knew I was a young female. I just had some clothes that looked awful on me. That was the only difference. So what I think about is, can you observe what's happening? Young speaks 7 times every meeting. Susie only speaks once, but when she does, she asks a question. Bob is always the one that does the summary. So-and-so is always the one that sets the meeting pace. Start observing just the pattern of how the dialogue happens without putting a judgment call about your role in it. After you look at those data points, look for what's your opening, what's not covered, what can you contribute, right? If somebody always asks a thoughtful question and somebody always summarizes and somebody always does the next steps, what's your role? I look for the opening, right? How do you create the upside of where you can contribute in a way that's authentic, and observing those meeting patterns. Catch that, I might say, I'm tired of Bob talking. He talks all the time, and I never get to talk because Bob's talking. Let's be honest. We know that Young doesn't really like women. That's the reason I'm not getting to talk. Now what am I doing? I'm not only assigning an emotion, but something very dangerous that Liane pointed out earlier, I'm assigning a judgment. I don't know that person's intention. I'm believing it to be true because of that label that I'm living. So when we are an observer, we just step back and look scientifically, observationally at data points. And what does any great scientist do? They create an experiment, right? They introduce a variable. Now, if I speak up after Bob does his 7th data point, what happens? If I say something thoughtful in response to Sally's question, what happens? Test. Then start testing a hypothesis and see what works. It takes a little bit of time, and it is hard. It is hard because we all want to be seen and heard and valued. And those moments can undermine that. But if we're going to keep going to work in those same teams and organizations, detaching and observing and then hypothesizing and testing can be a helpful way to show up differently without needing to part the curtains like, I'm going to talk now. It is my turn. We're talking all the time. Right? Liane, I'm guessing you have some thoughts about this.
Karen, you're guessing I have some thoughts about pretty much everything. Some of them are informed. Only some. So I'm going to go a totally different tack. Give another suggestion to Vivian. So particularly when I'm answering that question for women, one of the things I've noticed in my experimenting is women, I find often, not all women, but many women are reluctant to stand up for themselves. They have all sorts of ingrained things in their heads that cause them to say, I'm not worthy, or what I have to say isn't going to matter. I couldn't know as much as they know. So we're not very good at standing up for ourselves. You know what we're really good at? Standing up for other people. And I think some of that's our maternal instincts, our back away from my kid, that no matter whether we have kids or not, we have that in us. And so one of the tips I give is, Vivian, think about so again, use Karen's technique of thinking about what hasn't been said, what territory isn't covered, and which stakeholders am I going to bring into the room. Maybe no one has thought about how this is going to affect our customers in Vietnam. And goodness gracious, I am willing to put myself out there to stand up for our customers in Vietnam. Maybe no one has thought about our contract employees. And if I don't stand up, so amazingly, women who are quieter, more concerned about whether they can stand up for themselves and whether they're worthy, have no question about whether others are worthy. So I'm going to encourage you to think about who is counting on me and what is worth fighting for on somebody else's behalf. That's when all of a sudden we see the it's amazing what you see when a woman is fighting for someone else. So that would be my tip.
Wow.
And I'll just start,
Tammy.
and I've done a lot of work in this area, obviously, and with women from Asia, South Asia, the Middle East. I've done deep projects in Japan. And so I understand that when you hear advice from Americans or Canadians, oftentimes it's hard to say yes, but that just won't work in our culture because the spectrum of what speaking out looks like is very different. And so what I would offer is first understand, and I think Karen was describing this, and I call them triggers and tripwires. So you know when you go into a conversation, the context, the topics, and the people who are going to trigger something in you, an emotional reaction. And so even thinking about that a little bit ahead of time, going, oh, I know when Ha says that, it's, or oh, there Ha says that again. You kind of can plan a little bit in advance to be aware of the emotional reactions that you're having. So that's kind of the in the moment. And then you can just be aware of them and start to kind of talk to your brain differently. So research has shown women ruminate, we think over and over and over again about things before, during, and after more so than men. And so part of interrupting that process is catching it, you know, telling yourself the kind of the opposite, kind of talking yourself, you know, through that. And it takes mere seconds and no one has to see it. And then again, as the others have been describing, kind of objectively repositioning it in your mind. Oh, yeah, okay, they said that again. Here's what I know to be true. Here's what I can add on that. It doesn't have to be the same or even as much, but here's what I can add. So I'll stop there because we could literally talk about this one all day. But kind of mentally preparing your triggers and tripwires in advance, I think, could be helpful.
And you wrote a book, Reframing Your Story, talking all about that, right? So our audience out there, if you want to change the thinking, read Reframing Your Story, that written by Tammy. It's a wonderful book, Tammy. And again, I want to say to you, that book also for male leaders, not only for women, all right? So I want to re-emphasize it again. I read in it and I really enjoy it. So
thank you,
Liane. I want to go back to you for one thing that I noted down is about the habit, right?
So much, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, Vivian was like 10 seconds behind us, so. All right. So I think that I'm, way advanced in the future. I'm, 12 hours away, ahead of you guys and 10 seconds ahead of Vivian. So I'm cool. Liane. Earlier, you talked about the habits, right? And I have a strong belief that we all come to work with good intention. All right, we wanna contribute something good for ourselves and for the company, for the people around us, right? But a lot of things that we let our habit lead the way. That whatever that happens, it's not coming from what inside of us truly want. Like sending a document 200 pages and ask Liane to read over the weekend and November month is here, I'm not gonna read it, or like going to the meeting and keep sharing and forgetting about the people opinions and give them space to think. So that is where habit is really, really bad, right? So where can we spot that habits early and learn to avoid it? I want to start with you, Liane.
Yeah, so the habit that I loved, if we circle back to your mom's habit of making time in the afternoons and creating boundaries, if we model that for the next generation, that thinking is valuable, that it is not something that can just be interrupted, that's when to start. Starting habits in the home, starting habits in early life is where habits become the stickiest, because they just become your way of understanding the world. For you understand that thinking is a part of a healthy life, right? So starting earlier. But now, of course, we're into I'm 50 and it's a bit late to start some of those habits young. So now we're into the really challenging space of where in the moment I'm choosing something that's comfortable for me over something that is helpful. I'm just looking, I had a book on my, I don't know where I put it. I just had a book. Oh, here it is. This one isn't even out yet, but this is going to be a big hit. This is a really great book. It's called Dear Work by Sarah Ross. And she goes really into how do we interrupt those habits that are where we're choosing the comfortable thing, the easy thing in the moment, instead of the thing that's going to make us better. So that's the key thinking, or thinking about how we're thinking, is catching when am I doing the thing and what is the comfort it's giving me? What is making me choose that now? And how do I think a little longer about the benefit I could get from a different choice? So we have to be into that metacognition if we're going to interrupt bad habits and create new habits. Sarah's book is going to really help a lot of people with that idea.
So parent interrupting and thinking about thinking, right?
Yeah.
Karen, how about you?
How about me for what? What would you like to answer? We've talked about so many things. Routines, rituals, and boundaries, the patterns and habits.
About the habit. How can we spot our habit early so that we can, eliminate the bad habit that, harmful to our thinking or others people's thinking?
Be observant about your moments of regret. That moment when you say, I wish I would have, or I wish I would not have, and that could be everything from, I wish I would not have eaten that cookie, I wasn't hungry, to, I wish I would have gone to the gym, to, I wish I would have said this. Look for the moments of regret for two reasons. One, to the point we've been talking about, these tend to be the things we ruminate on. We punish ourselves for these things. These are where the saboteur voices inside of us rise up and say, see, you really don't belong there. You're never going to make it. This is the source of those unhelpful thoughts that keep us from showing up at our best, where we hold ourselves back with the way that we think and focus on something. The other piece too is think about what would you have done differently, right? That is a productive, as long as it comes from a place of non-judgment, right? If that scenario showed up again, instead of immediately walking by the stove and seeing there's a warm cookie and picking it up and eating it, I would pause, introduce the pattern interrupt, and ask myself, am I hungry? Oh, I'm not hungry. I won't eat the cookie, right? I mean, think about those moments where you feel kind of badly. Why is that? Where is that coming from? And how would you choose differently? And I just think about choosing differently as soon as the next choice. If you wrote an email that wasn't great, the next one can be better. If you ate a cookie, next time eat a banana, right? I mean, we are one choice away from becoming the person we want to be or the person that we regret being.
Wow.
One choice. And the only place choice lives is in this present moment, not in the past, not in the future, right here, right now. Choice is always on and always available.
Wow.
Lovely.
So beautiful.
And I'll just maybe end with a quick tip, and then, because we talked about boundaries, but then set and give your cues. So I remember, Liane, you would remember this. We sat in open space, and my husband bought me one year the biggest earphones ever. And when I put those on, it was a signal to everyone around. I mean, the building has to be on fire for you to interrupt Tammy when she has those on. Because I didn't wear them all the time, but when I put them on, it was serious thinking time. And now, sure, I mean, when I say this to people, they usually have a heart attack. If you need an hour to think, shut off your email, shut off your Slack, shut off your phone, and go like, oh, what if my boss has to? Well, you could be going to the washroom or like tending a sick dog in that hour. Like, they don't know. So just shut it off and think. Like, we have to get much, much better at protecting this time.
Wow. So it means that November is really, really important to a lot of us, right? No phone, no laptop, no email, no TV, so that we can focus on something that help us to think and grow. And you know what? We only have 2 minutes left, and I feel like the conversation went so fast. We still a lot of things that we can discuss on this. But Liane has another one that coming after this, and Karen also, and Tammy also have, they packed with a lot of things. So I want to say thank you so much for spending your morning to joy and sharing your expert, ideas and thoughts on this. We really appreciate that. We wish you enjoy the day, have a wonderful day, and have many people out there think better, to do better, and to change, right? For something better.
Thank you for bringing us together. That's your gift.
Thank you so much. And Vivian, be safe in that storm.
All right. Bye-bye. Thank you very much.
Bye.